What are you doing?
I'm getting in shape. I have to test a new 70-200 and I've been using primes for years. I'm not strong enough. Oh. Well, that's not so bad. Oh hey, it's Wes, and today it's finally time to talk about, honestly, one of the most exciting lenses to ever come out for E-mount. And I'm not even exaggerating on this one. We have the Tamron 70-180 zoom. So why is this so exciting? Well, as you saw in the intro, it's light. It is small and unexpectedly compact. And a lot of reviews I've found try to compare this to the 70-200 G Master. I find that that's not exactly the right path to take. This costs less and is smaller and lighter than the 70-200 f4 from Sony. Here, let me put away the 28-75, we'll look at that later. And as you can see here, they are somewhat similar in size. The Tamron is just a little bit thicker, but it's actually shorter. And in the hand, it weighs almost the same. So I would much rather compare it to that. Except this is a 2.8 and that's an f4, so you have twice as much light coming through this. What could possibly be any disadvantage? Let's get into it. Starting with the categories, number one, the build quality, as always. So this is obviously a value price, a low cost option. You're not paying a lot for f2.8. And so because of that, we have something that is very plasticky. It is very light for 2.8, and just touching it, it feels incredibly cheap. And honestly, I can't be surprised at that. I can't be disappointed at that. That is exactly what we have to expect here. And the focus ring here isn't rubber like the zoom ring, it's just textured plastic, so that's not that cool. The motion, the external zooming, does not inspire confidence. But it is weather sealed. We have a gasket on the back. We've got gaskets wherever we need those gaskets. And a pretty beefy, substantial lens hood that isn't going to fall off very easily. It's going to stay on there. It's reasonably well considered design, and you do get a lot of bang for your buck, but I would not want to bang this around too much. I feel like if I dropped my camera or I knocked it pretty hard against something, this is not going to hold up to a lot of abuse, and I can't give this any more than a 6 out of 10 for build quality. Very thin, very light, very plasticky. But let's move on, see what else we can find. Number 2 is handling and usability. And we have some huge pluses as well as some huge minuses here. Let me explain. Number 1, let's start with the great parts. Obviously, the biggest plus for usability is this is so light and compact for a 2.8 zoom. Canon came out with their new compact RF mount 2.8 zoom, but it is way thicker than this. This thing is so light for a 2.8. You really don't feel like you're using a big heavy zoom lens like you would expect. But there are some pretty serious negatives. Number 1, depending on who you are, there are no buttons or switches on this lens. No manual focus, no optical stabilization, off-on, no modes. It's pretty bare bones. Our manual focus ring here is pretty small, you gotta be very intentional about finding it, and it's kind of hard to use because you don't have the usual manual focus switch on the body like you normally would. And our biggest fault to usability is no image stabilization in the lens. Now for the other Tamron lenses, such as the 28-75 and even the wider one, that's not as big of an issue because most of Sony's full-frame bodies have built-in image stabilization on the sensor. However, at 180 millimeters, Sony's stabilization just does not cut it. It cannot keep up at this sort of a focal length, and so things get very shaky. And if you're using this, say, on one of their APS-C bodies, like the A6100 or A6400, which you use for a lot of video, and it's not unreasonable to put this on here because it's so compact and lightweight, it becomes pretty much unusable for video unless you're really locked down on a tripod. And even when you walk past the tripod, it will shake very noticeably and that footage is gone. So that's a little disappointing. I know that we're looking to save a lot of money and corners had to be cut to achieve that, but I feel like that is a corner that they should not have cut and they should have charged whatever they needed to charge to get image stabilization in there. It's a big problem for me. Now, other people might have more steady hands than I do, but I'm a little bit shaky. I tend to do things quickly, very run and gun, and I've found motion creeping into my images at like 1/400th of a second when I'm running things around. So for indoor stuff where you're used to bring your shutter speed way down, when you're zoomed in all the way, you might have some trouble. You can't really use a slow shutter speed on this. Outdoors, when you're shooting in bright sunlight, it's fine, it's great. And so for usability, we've got big pluses, big minuses. I gotta give this a 7 out of 10. Not terrible, but depending on who you are, there are some deal breakers. Maybe, maybe not. Next up is image quality. And I've heard a lot of great things about this lens for image quality. A lot of the early reviews were saying that this is better image quality than the Sony 7-200 GM. I don't think I got a bad copy. Maybe I'm just not looking for the same things as other people. I found that there is slightly more chromatic aberration than the 7-200 GM. When you zoom in all the way, there is a tremendous amount of barrel distortion, like those horizons just curve. You can correct it in post, but it would be nice to not have to do that. Now, I'm not saying that it's not sharp. It is very sharp. It is consistently sharp. It is sharp across the frame. I have no major issues with the sharpness or clarity of this lens. It resists flaring quite well. It's honestly surprisingly good image quality for the money. I just don't see it as being up there with the G Master. Am I biased towards the G Master? I don't think so. I don't even have one. I've rented one several times. And honestly, I just don't prefer it. I find it costs too much. It's too big and heavy to justify the expense. So I'm still using the f4 for my work. Question is, am I gonna switch to this one? And we'll get to that later. And so overall, no big deal breakers. Our image quality, I'm gonna give that an 8 out of 10. It's a solid performer. Image character. This one is very subjective, so take it with a grain of salt. But for me, I got a lot of disappointments here for image character. If you take a close look at this, the bokeh balls on this are really gross. Some of the worst ones I've ever seen on a modern lens. It's kind of messy. And because of that, the autofocus areas, depending on what kind of a background you have, can get really nervous. A lot of the time though, it can be pretty nice and smooth. Also, toward the edges, you get a lot of cat's eyeing, even if you're not even that close to the edge. Even stopping down to, say in this image, f4.5, you still have truncated balls, which again, gives you some slightly nervous bokeh. Overall, somehow though, the rendering is reasonably good. The fall off is not too bad. It is a very modern lens in design, making it kind of dry, kind of clinical. The flares are reasonably uninteresting. Not a lot going on here. So overall, I'm afraid that I have to give this a 5 out of 10 for image character. Nothing interesting and really nothing impressive at all. Autofocus, and this is one of the categories that people were most concerned about. And for the most part, I have to say, you're not going to be disappointed. Now for video, this is fantastic. It stays on target. It really locks onto stuff great. For photos, it is very quick and snappy. It doesn't have the ridiculously advanced dual direct drive SSM autofocus system as in like the GM, but it doesn't need to. These lens elements are so much smaller. When you're focusing the G Master, you can really feel it wrenching those lens elements back and forth. And this one, it is effortless. You can barely feel it focusing. It is so fast and easy. Now, it feels like it's stepping just a little bit, again, just because it's not as advanced of an autofocus system. So you can kind of feel it, you can hear it just a little bit, but for video, I found that it's not a deal breaker with the autofocus system going on in here. Now, I have one caveat. And this is only for pixel peepers. When I'm shooting at a distance, I have found that this often just barely misses focus. I'm not sure what's going on here. It's probably just a third-party lens thing, but I'm reasonably far away from my subject and I'm zoomed in all the way and they're fairly small in the frame. It just misses it just a little bit. When you're zoomed out, you definitely cannot tell, and honestly, for 99% of circumstances, you won't know. But if you're one of those people that's going to be looking way too close at your images, you might notice this happening. When it comes to eye autofocus and face tracking, I found that it's just slightly behind the usability of a native lens. So if you, say, could do eye autofocus from 20 feet away, now you're going to have to be 15 feet away. And when using the real-time autofocus and the auto-lock, auto-tracking on the A9, I found that it doesn't do real-time autofocus quite as reliably. Like when someone turns around, instead of just tracking the back of their head like it's supposed to, like this camera did, watch this. No faces. But it probably didn't focus on the wall behind me. This thing, it will snap to the wall a lot of the time. I'm not sure exactly why that's going on, but it's going on. Doesn't do it all the time, but it's not 100% as reliable. Overall, for most circumstances, even backlight, low light, this is a solid performer. Not the best, but it is solid. So I've got to get this an 8 out of 10 for autofocus. Very quick, very snappy, but just missing some of the rough edges there. Value, and I think you know what's going to happen right now. Value is an easy category for this lens. This is $1,200. Probably the cheapest 2.8 autofocus lens, 70-200, that we've ever seen. The f4, $1,500. The Sony GM, $2,600. If we break out into third party, you have the Sigma, which you could adapt but doesn't work great adapted, $1,500, and the old Tamron 70-200 for Nikon and Canon, $1,300. That's a phenomenal value. And so obviously, I can't give this anything other than a 10 out of 10 for value. Big win. And that's where this one really cleans up. So overall, we've got a 44 out of 60. That's a reasonably strong score, and it's a reasonably strong lens. But it has a few things that might be deal breakers for some people. For other people, this is just a no-brainer, an easy buy for them. If you want to look closer into the images that I've been showing you, there is a link down in the description to my website for some larger, higher resolution versions. If you want to pick this lens up, there's a link down in the description for that. Feel free to use my affiliate links. It helps support this channel and feed my family. Final conclusion for me though, if you're still sticking around, is I'm not going to be keeping this. This one just does not quite cut it for me. I'm a hybrid shooter. I like to take video sometimes, and when you switch to video mode and you're zoomed in all the way handheld with this, the video is nearly unusable. Even on, say, an A9, A7 III, A7 R4, just doesn't stabilize enough. You can try to fix it with warp stabilization in post, but it's too much work for it to do. So for me, personally, I'm really looking forward to what Sigma comes out with for a native E-mount mirrorless 70-200. It's probably going to be bigger, it's probably going to be heavier, but that might be the one for me because they've been doing really great work with their native glass. So, if you have any questions about this, any comments, you think I missed anything, let me know down in the comments below. until next time, which is when we're going to be looking at the 28 to 75, go take some photos. Oh hey, it's Wes, and today it's finally talk time about. It's very small. You've got to be pretty intentional about finding it. Our manual focus ring here is pretty small. You gotta be